It's time to change. It's time to confront. It's time to heal. It's time to hold a conversation on race, connecting Central Indiana.
Good evening, and welcome to this conversation on race, connecting Central Indiana. We have witnessed weeks of demonstrations demanding social justice, especially on the issue of racial equity. Discussing race is never easy. That is why WRTV and Radio One have made the commitment to lead the discussion with many voices of people with purpose looking towards progress. Tonight, you will hear from city leaders and members of the Indianapolis community about the challenges facing Indianapolis. We hope to answer several questions, including how did we get to this pivotal moment in our city's history, and how do we, working together, move forward?
Good evening, everyone. I am Tina Cosby, host of Community Connection on AM 1310 The Light and 92.7 FM of Radio One. We are going to jump right in, so please allow me to introduce our esteemed panel. Dr. Patricia Payne. She is a longtime educator in the Indianapolis public school system, one of the top-rated civil rights attorneys to come along in quite a while. But Michael Sutherland has done it. So Michael, welcome to our discussion today. He is the president of the Indianapolis City County Council, Mr. Vaughn. We have been tasked with answering the why as we get this conversation going, the why on race in Central Indiana. Meaning, why? How did we get here in Central Indiana? And Indianapolis and Marion County pretty much mirrors most of the nation. There are disparities in educational achievement between predominantly white township schools and IPS schools, which are predominantly Black and brown, and even some disparities among the township schools, which are separating into areas of race. Black and white police community relations have never been more strained or dysfunctional. Michael, you've been involved in some legalities and some legal action with law enforcement. Unemployment among Black and brown residents of the county remains nearly double that of the overall rate, the unemployment rate among Black and brown. And then you have the police killing of George Floyd, broadcast around the world, poured on top of all of this, and that is where we are today. We don't have time to go back too far, but just the past 6 years, how did we get here in Central Indiana, and how do we undo it?
I was just going to say it's called systemic racism, and it's so refreshing to finally hear people really talking about what the problem is. And it started way back when, and very intentionally started. Mm-hmm. And of course, Indiana was right in there. In fact, Indianapolis was right in there in terms of making sure that people of African descent were held back. When you, we use the analogy of the Monopoly game. When you start with, everybody starts with the same capital, that $200. That's the way it used to be when I was coming up. But it doesn't matter. If you start with the same capital, but you don't come in the game until 3 hours behind everyone else, what happens? Everything's gone by the time you get into the game. So you kind of feel relieved when you land in jail, you see. So when you start that far behind, it's very hard, if ever, to catch up. And all of these laws and policies that were put in place many, many, many years ago, including things like the GI Bill, when we'd be over there fighting, but when we'd come home, nothing, but the white soldiers got everything. It still is moving that way. Systemic racism is still very much alive and well.
Mr. President of the council, what is systematically racist or inherently racist about UNIGOV that still exists today? Have any of those ills been corrected?
So let's talk about what didn't get moved in UNIGOV.
Okay.
For one, that would be our school systems. The fact that our schools are paid for by property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And in areas that began to be disinvested, when folks began to move out into the suburbs, a lot of that wealth left. And as we know, we have a history in our country of redlining, which meant then that a number of the communities in which a black, and I don't know that there was very much brown at that time, but the communities in which there were black families were often not able to acquire wealth, and so therefore that impacted wealth, et cetera. We still feel that today. We still have that impact of the redlining today in our health and in our wealth. Let's face it, a number of the areas where black people lived weren't the most desirable. Oftentimes they were near industrial sites. It would contaminate the air, it would contaminate the water, it would contaminate the groundwater. And we see the results of that today, for example, in the impact that COVID has had on respiratory illnesses in black families, black and brown, but predominantly black families. So we still feel those effects today, and it's our job on the council and in administration to recognize that impact that it has had on the disparities in wealth and opportunity and education. The point I was making earlier about property taxes. If I don't have high property taxes, if we're not accumulating a great deal of resources from the property taxes in certain communities, then our schools are going to suffer. So that was a really powerful component of Unigov in the fact that it left our school systems out of the mix entirely. So our job right now on the council.
Or unintended consequence. What do you think?
I'm sorry.
Unintended consequence or intended? I mean, or unthought of consequence. I don't know. Unintended consequence, or do you think that was the idea all along?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Are you asking me whether it was an unintended consequence? Let's be frank about it. No, it's not. And if you look at any of the histories of Unigov and any of the people who were proponents of, or the largest voices in Unigov, and you read their stories and you hear their histories, no, it was intentional. There's no two ways about that.
And I think we should start talking about each of the groups in our community making up the whole. We're all principals.
Can Central Indiana undo the wrongs? Can it be undone? Or if not undone, corrected and put on the right path? Can it happen here in Central Indiana? And I'll let Dr. Payne, you're nodding, so I'll let you go first.
I was just going to say, we may be able to put it on the right path, but like I said, it's all according to who's in place and who's willing to do the work.
Okay.
It takes a lot of work beginning with your own self.
Self-awareness. President Ossoly.
It took 400 years to get here. Let's be realistic. We can get ourselves on the right path, but as Dr. Payne is saying right now, we've got to have people in positions to ensure that it has longevity, that it is sustainable, that it gets legs that will long outlive all of us. And that takes a commitment and a determination to get these things addressed, and a constant normalizing of the discussion. That if we don't normalize that discussion, we will allow it to sort of fade into a grayness that it has existed in this gray nebulous area where we're kind of aware that there's racism kind of thing, but it's really not all that bad, and you probably don't have it here. It's for those people over there. No, it is up to us to continue to say we have to address it. We won't change necessarily hearts. That's up to God, but we can change actions.
Yes.
And I think that's the direction that we have to, at least in these early days, start to go. And by the grace of God, in 2 or 3 generations, maybe our great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be able to say, black, white, I don't understand. We're humans.
So you're talking about long-term generational. This won't be solved with a book. It won't be solved in 5 years, but we can start the process.
Yeah.
400 years it took us to get here.
400 years to get here, indeed.
That's right.
Michael, are you back with us? Would you like to weigh in on this last question?
I would, yeah. It is a process. It's a continuing process. Saul Alinsky once said the solution is to continue to talk. if you stop talking and you just form your opinions based upon speculation and supposition, you're not really getting at the truth. And I urge everybody to read the book or watch the movie Just Mercy, because it is so accurate even today. Absolutely accurate. And and the other thing is, you can see the debate going on, to address what Bob said, at the national level. The Senate has a stupid proposal. They want to rewrap the same package. They want to protect the police. They don't want to do away with qualified immunity. So, you can do a lot of things locally, but there still has to be things done nationally, and that's not going to happen unless we get the right person in the White House and we get the right people in the Senate.
I wanted Bob to talk about I don't know if it's a resolution or what that has just been passed with the city county council that deals with the disparities. The personalities in the city that you are addressing.
Is that declaring racism a public health crisis? Is that the one, the resolution declaring racism a public health crisis?
Yeah, that.
Okay.
Sure, and I'm excited to talk about that for the simple reason that we got enough data, and there's enough data nationally, obviously, to indicate the impacts of racism on health. And Dr. Payne, you and I have had numerous conversations about this and how important it is to put everything on the table so that there is nowhere to go. Let's have a frank and open discussion. How do we best identify these items? And now as we move forward, they're irrefutable because they're facts and now they're documented.
Exactly.
So it is basically, we are resolved to, one, collect data disaggregated by race on the staffing, on the procurement, on the contracting, and the uses of our government funding, so that we can begin to approach this equity that we have found that has been lacking, these many generations. How can we? The whole idea is that we will intentionally look at where we have our disparities and question one another on the decisions that we make, whether our decisions are actually further impacting disparity or relieving disparity. And even as we come to our budget hearings in these next 8 weeks, that will be one of the questions that we will have for every presentation. We said in the early days when we did our very first race and equity, a gathering for all city county employees, within the city county building itself. One, we're going to normalize this particular discussion, and we're going to work to make sure that race and equity is within the DNA of city government. So it's not an add-on that, let me check off that box. No, it needs to be automatic.
You've been battling these inequities in court, civil and criminal. You've gone against the police departments. In one particular case that I'm familiar with, you won after, I don't know how many years, but
13.
Okay, 13 years. Why does it take, it took you 13 years. It took the knee on the neck of George Floyd 8 minutes and 46 seconds to throw the nation and the world into, hey, we got to do better. Can anybody explain that?
Let me give you another example of one in Indianapolis, if I could. This was a black man who was being followed by a police officer, and he waited for him to do something like didn't turn his signal light on, and then he began to chase him. And the man was 30-some years old. He didn't know his way around that neighborhood, so he finally bailed out of his car and ran, and he was tackled. Sound familiar? And so he's tackled, and one of the officers gets a pair of handcuffs out, puts him on his hand, and uses it as a weapon and hits him in the head. And he dies. He doesn't die immediately. He dies in the paddy wagon. The police responded by saying first, he fell down and hit a manhole cover. That's why he has these marks on his head.
Right.
The second one was he must have hit his head in the paddy wagon. We probably didn't have him secured. The third version was he must have died of drugs. Now, this was the police statement's spokesperson saying this without any evidence. And finally, after about four years, I get an eyewitness who came as a good Samaritan to help the officer. He says, I saw the whole thing. And they took a video of me to demonstrate how it was. And they hid that video for 4 years. But the officers, none of them ever got disciplined. So I want to go back to this. If the police do this deliberately and the FOP participate in this, you're never going to have community trust.
Thank you all so much for being with us this evening. The conversation does continue.
WRTV is teaming up with Radio One for a conversation on race, connecting Central Indiana. And in this segment, we will focus on the now, where we are today, the current climate of race relations, and where do we go from here. My name is Marc Mullins with WRTV, and I'm joined today by two panelists for the discussion. Adrianne Slash is the president of the Exchange at the Indianapolis Urban League, and Jessica Louise is a community organizer with Indy 10 Black Lives Matter. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Let me start with you today, Adrianne. Let's talk about what actions are being taken now that are visible and tangible that can improve race relations in Central Indiana.
I think that the first and foremost piece is people are uncomfortable and starting to become more uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. Whether they want to or not, we're having the opportunity to have conversations that we've only halfway had for the past 50 years. We've come quite a bit of a way, but we haven't gotten past the politeness. We haven't gotten past having conversations about things that people don't want to talk about. And right now, pleased as punch, I hate to say it that way, but that we're okay, and we're finally moving into a place where it's okay to say Black in every sentence of a paragraph and not just in one shadowed by African American from the beginning. But we're comfortable being Black, and we're comfortable having a conversation about Black lives.
Jessica, you've been organizing with Indy 10 Black Lives Matter. That's been a tangible movement that we've seen in the streets of Indianapolis and in its suburbs as well. So that's obviously one way that we are seeing changes being made for relations in our area. What are you hearing when you're out there from other folks who are marching about what they think it's going to take to improve race relations now?
I think that, like Adrianne said, that conversations are important, but in addition to conversations, we need actions. So with those actions, when you see us take to the streets, when you see us provide support and help and resources to people who are looking for safe and secure ways to express their grief and their rage, in addition to that, it gets us under the lens of organizations and under individuals who have the power to affect change. The City Council for Indianapolis passed a declaration that said that racism is a public health emergency, and that is going to get tangible resources into the hands of the communities that we serve. We've been able to speak with several nonprofit organizations in regards to their policies and procedures and how those policies and procedures translate into equity, not only for their employees and staff, but also for the communities that they say that they serve. So direct action is just one way that people can get involved, but that direct action is opening up doors for conversations to happen, for equity to be established for everyone.
Uncomfortable conversations. I've been having more of them lately myself. Have you been having more uncomfortable conversations, and have people been admitting that this is uncomfortable for me, but I'm going to go with it?
I can answer that question, yes. The best place that I can tell you, representing a body of young professionals that are trying to find safe spaces right now, because everyone has become a D&I professional to their company, to their friends, to the people in their neighborhood. The uncomfortable conversations have started off for some in the ways where it goes a little something like this. Well, you've never said anything to me like that. Is that really how you feel? Is that something that happens to you in your life? And the response now, we're hearing more people actually respond. Yes, of course, I'm Black. I live in America. I've had these days. I'm not necessarily sure that this has always been something we've been open to having a conversation about. And then also we know that we've got a lot of organizations and companies alike that have wanted to make a statement or have wanted to jump in at some point. And what we have to tell them is, sure, we can have those conversations, but it's extremely important for you to know that you can make a statement, you can post a time, but if you haven't changed your board makeup, if you haven't changed your hiring practices, if you haven't gone from just a diversity number and spread, but to a space where people feel as though they belong and are welcome to be in those same spaces, then we're just going to sit here and be uncomfortable for a while.
Do you think that's sustainable? Do you think companies are really going to make a dedication to fighting systemic racism in ways that last years to come?
I think we're at a start, and I have nothing but praise to give to Indy 10 and all of the work that they've been doing on the front line, because that's really, it's a lot that we've been saying things, we've been attempting to hold organizations accountable, we've been attempting to hold companies accountable, but until they're really uncomfortable, their bottom lines are affected, their ability to serve people, their ability to go on with business as usual is interrupted. It sometimes can be hard to hear.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the conversations that we've been having or questions that we've been asked. And one that I've been getting quite a bit is from people who say, I don't understand how we got here, or why there was such unrest and rioting and destruction. And I can understand the peaceful protests, but I don't understand when things get out of line. Jessica, have you heard any of those kinds of comments and engaged in those conversations where you have to explain how we got to this place and why it keeps happening throughout history?
I absolutely have. The day after the Friday unrest happened in late May, we actually met with the mayor of Indianapolis as well as some members from his team because they had some of the same questions. The onus is absolutely on the city of Indianapolis and Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. People are tired of waiting for justice. People are tired of waiting for equity to happen. And so what you saw was a culmination and a manifestation of years of misconduct and mismanagement by the city. People are still grieving for Eleanor Northington. People are still grieving for Aaron Bailey. People are still grieving for Christopher Goodloe and Mac Long and all of these other lives that we've lost in Indianapolis because of IMPD. And when you don't see justice and you also see things be perpetuated in other areas and you see the response to that, people feel like that is their only way for them to get the city's attention. We've advised Joe Hogsett and his administration how to manage these things. No one has reached out to the families. There haven't been any recommendations for officers to be fired. There haven't been any firings or reassignments or trainings.
I want to also talk about the catchphrases that we're hearing in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of people do say all lives matter. Wait a minute, this should be about everyone. Why is this something that the people who want to be allies, the allies who are speaking out, people who have questions, how do you make them understand that, yes, we understand all lives matter, but why is Black Lives Matter such an important point to get across? Adrianne, let's start with you.
So I think that it's very important that people have a very full understanding that if that's really where they want to land on things, that they need to make sure that Black Lives Matter within that. So basically what we've seen for years, our entire existence, and basically our entire existence here in this country, we have seen approaches that have not paid attention to disparity. They have not paid attention to marginalized communities. They have not paid attention to the massive gaps that we as Black people in America have to experience and have to live with. And so it's hard for me whenever someone says that to me as a rebuttal, because the first thing that comes to mind for me is, so if that's the case, then you need to make sure that all the ways that you show me that my life doesn't matter, that you're willing to do the work to make up that gap if you want us to be okay with your statement.
Jessica, as a community organizer with Indy 10 Black Lives Matter, how do you convey that Black Lives Matter? How do you get people to hear it and understand it?
So one of our main focuses is on affirming and underscoring the humanity of our people. As Adrianne touched on, Black residents disproportionately face, racism in a myriad of ways, from healthcare to education to housing. And so we are focused on things that center our community because unfortunately society has decided not to. And so if you are participating in a derailing or a distracting conversation in regards to all lives mattering, I would encourage you and aggressively challenge you to figure out why you insist on taking the message away from residents who it's meant to benefit.
A lot of people have been asking, what can we do to help? What can I do at home to help? What conversation should I be having with my family? How can I be a better ally? What do you say to those who want to understand, that want to be an ally, but just don't know how?
So it's never too late to examine the way that you live, the things that you do, the places you go, the people that are in those spaces, and to evaluate how big really is my world? How much am I paying attention to in places where I have the opportunity to invite in others, specifically bringing in counter views to the way that I see the world, right? So how can I do that? For business owners, what does my hiring look like? For hiring managers, what do I look like when I'm going out to hire for positions? When I'm donating my dollars, am I giving to organizations that are helping to create an equitable community? When I work with politicians, am I having conversations with them about the entire community, or am I just talking about people that look like me and people that are within my friendship circles? There's a very serious system that we've been living within here in this country, and it's extremely important, even here in Indianapolis, where people like to say that we do it better than other places, that we start to become extremely uncomfortable and get comfortable with opening the door and letting more people in and making sure that equity is really our goal, not just fairness, not just equality, but equity.
Last topic I want to cover today involves this focus on removing monuments, of changing labels, companies changing labels, of tearing down statues. Your views on what's happening and what we can learn from this movement of looking at different parts of our history and saying this needs to change or this needs to be understood. Should these monuments be coming down? Should they be put into context? Should they be in museums so we can learn from the past?
I want all the monuments down. I want the monuments down. I want Mount Rushmore restored to the indigenous people whose land it was carved into. I'm in favor of all of them being removed. They don't need to be in museums. I think we have a clear understanding of the history of the United States. And if we don't, then we can go to the McGraw-Hill textbooks that are in our schools. There is not equity in education. And so we are taught white history. None of these people whose monuments have been erected are in danger of having their history erased. Racism is still around. The things that they have benefited from are still around. White supremacy is still around. And so every monument, in my opinion, can come down.
Yeah, and I would say, she said all the things, and there's no real add-on to that other than we will continue to demand all the actions behind the words. And so I think that you can look for in this city specifically, I can't speak for other people. I don't know what others are planning to do, but we will be calling for actions behind all the statements. I don't think that there has been a statement that's put out that someone didn't take note of, and we will be looking for it, whether it means hiring practices, whether it means donor dollars, whether it means the support they put behind their Black employees, the growth opportunities, the pipelines that they build out of our communities directly into their companies. We will be looking for the actions. We will be looking for the ways that they can break down systemic racism within the infrastructures inside of their companies and inside of our community. And we will be trying our very best to hold them as accountable as we possibly can. And so who knows, there could be some that wish that they didn't say what they said because they didn't think through what was coming next. But I'm pretty sure there is a consultant that's waiting for them to call and say, can you help me? Because they're all going to need some help.
Plenty of work still to do, accountability, but having the conversation is what it has to be about at this point. Up next is my colleague at Radio One, Karen Vaughn, talking about a conversation that many Black families have to have called The Talk.
Welcome, everyone. This segment is the talk. It's the discussion that most parents have, with their kids, but Black and brown parents have an additional talk. The talk about what to do whenever they're stopped by a police officer or confronted by an individual. Now, as parents, we always assume that, at some point our child is going to come in contact with a police officer in a number of situations, good and bad, but we never know when someone else who is not a police officer will decide to be the judge, jury, and executioner, as seen with Trayvon Martin and most recently, Ahmaud Arbery. So we have a panel here from Central Indiana that we're going to join in and talk about the talk that we have with our children. So I would love to introduce and thank you so much to all of our panelists for taking part in this. IMPD Deputy Chief of Performance and Policy, Kendale Adams, City County Councilor Maggie Lewis, and CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Indianapolis, Indiana State Rep Gregory Porter, and Zion King, who is a senior at Kentucky State University. Welcome. So my first question, Gregory, I'm going to hand that off to you. What does the talk mean in Black households?
From my window, the talk in Black households is, how do you act out in public when you are in front of a police officer or in general? When I had talked to my children and young people now, the program that we have is how you're going to be polite. How are you not going to get rattled by any situation? Conflict resolution is important. We have to teach people about conflict resolution regards to every day in life. But when we enter dealing with the officers or people of authority, how do you continue to maybe role play? How do you have a conversation with your friends versus the police officer or by anyone through different lenses? So if you're talking to your friends, your principal, police officer, your coach or whatever, how do you communicate? And from my perspective, it's not just it's a talk in general. It's an attitude in general. And unfortunately, we have to understand those conversations and how we do communicate with individuals that we encounter.
And Kendale, I want to ask you, because you relate to this topic from both sides as a police officer and father of Black children. How did you have this conversation with your kids?
Yeah, so, it's an important conversation that I have as a parent, as a police officer, and as a person who lives and works in this community. And I have this conversation with my daughter quite often about her perceptions about what she's seeing nationally versus my expectation of how she should interact with persons of authority. And I'm not just talking about police officers. I'm talking about, your counselor, to some degree, your mother, your parents. And so we have these conversations quite often, as well as I do mentoring. And one of the classes I do with some of the judges and some of the lawyers is specifically how to interact with law enforcement and how to de-escalate those situations so that you're not in a situation where you're engaging with the law enforcement for a very long period of time. Because I tell the kids that I mentor that, I want your experience with the police to be as short as it can be. And so we talk through different scenarios that can sometimes lead to situations that aren't favorable for them or situations that are favorable for them.
Mm-hmm. Maggie, I want to bring you into this because I know that you are a mother of a young son like I am. Who's going into high school, that will be driving soon. And I can tell you, from my perspective, I'm a little haunted by it. He's not my baby anymore. He's a developing young man that is going to have various experiences, and I can't control them all.
Right.
And not everyone can relate to having the talk with their children. So explain to people who haven't experienced this from a mother's perspective, what it's like to have a daily fear of your child or your loved ones, or, you know, those young men and women in your family, the fears that we have for them being pulled over by police or being approached by individuals.
So as a mother, they're always going to be our babies, regardless of what age they are, right? Like we want to protect them as much as we can. So those talks are important, but also we know that they're necessary. Like we have to have these challenging conversations with our kids. My young man is 13 years old, right? And we started having the talk really early in life, but specifically at 8 years old, I'd say. I think it's been 12 years since Trayvon Martin was murdered. And we had to have that conversation with our young man, our baby, about being Black in America. And it's necessary. I feel guilty having that conversation with him at times. But again, I recognize that I have to talk to him and be honest about what's happening in our country.
And Zion, I know that you have joined in Kendale and through other organizations, you know, being a part of the workshops in regards to what to do when you're confronted by an individual or a police officer. And how has that helped you?
It's more than a talk to me. It's kind of like a manual for survival almost. So like you can forget a talk, but yeah, when our parents explain like what to do when we get put over by the police, it's kind of like, well, you better do whatever you can to make it out that situation alive. So I feel like it's helped me in a way to like, I'm more cautious when I get pulled over now, because from my perspective, since I've been seeing all this going on with the police, I'm looking at it from the lens of, oh man, this police officer is enraged. He's coming to kill me, when all he wanted to do is pull me over because I was speeding. So it's made me, the talk has made me more cautious to, okay, he's not mad, he's just doing his job. Or, hey, you need to move slowly while you're in the car because it can look like you're grabbing for a weapon. So I feel like the talk just made me more cautious.
Yeah. And have you shared that with, you know, friends that you know that may have not had the same experience as you, that may have not had the talk, because you're going out, you know, with friends and co-workers and other students. So how have you all collectively come together to kind of help each other through?
It just depends what my friends look like. Honestly, if they look like me, we're all kind of in the same boat. They know that they need to act a certain way when they get pulled over. With my other friends that may be white, Hispanic, etc., they don't really understand like the seriousness of the talk. Like they understand what I'm saying and how they should apply it to their life when they're caught in those situations. But it's kind of like a disconnect there if you're outside of my race. Not saying they'll never experience anything like that, but it's kind of like a disconnect.
Mm-hmm. Anyone on the panel, would you like to kind of like piggyback off of what Zion had to say?
We need to continue to have these conversations. We need to continue to talk to our children, talk to our friends. And Maggie said something I thought was important too, choices. We need to make sure that our children are making the appropriate choices. Now, I get it. They're children. They're not always going to make the right choices. We get that. But when you're dealing with law enforcement, a lot of this has to do with how we behave, the choices we make. I'm not saying all the time. Certainly, we've seen some instances across the country where they everything has gone right and still has gone tragically wrong, and we recognize that. And one of the things that I try to talk to young folks about is, we have to look at law enforcement individually. We can't look and say what happened in Minneapolis. I'm not saying it can't happen here, but those kind of things have been prohibited in our policy for years. And so Zion getting to know police officers, getting to talk to them one-on-one, understanding that, like he just said, you have two people in a situation that are scared. You have both the police and you have the individual. There are more police killed during traffic stops than any other time. I think Zion's he probably heard that during his legal rights class that we have. And so you have a police officer, black or white, that's pulled over someone that has no idea who's in that car. and whether that person will try to hurt them. And then you have the person in the car that, particularly if they're black or brown, saying, I hope I'm gonna get out of this. So, we've got to de-escalate situations, both on the police side and from a community standpoint, so that we get out of those situations very quickly.
I want to thank you all for joining me today. It's been enlightening. I loved what everyone had to say about the talk. And I think that we've helped others be able to have the talk with their children. Yes, we're passing the torch over to you, and we're also passing the torch over to Rafael Sanchez. He is going to dig deeper into our next steps.
Welcome back and good evening. Our conversation on race continues as we focus on the next steps. And joining us now, the mayor of Indianapolis, Joe Hogsett, IMPD Police Chief Randal Taylor, and Dr. Shelby Keglar. He's a clinical psychologist. Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
When I say Black Lives Matter, Mr. Mayor, what does that mean to you?
Well, how can we ever say that all lives matter unless we are willing to unequivocally affirm that Black lives matter? Black Lives Matter means that everyone in our community is valued and has value. Black Lives Matter means that we have a community that is free from all forms of racial, gender, disparity, and all forms of discrimination are eliminated.
Black lives do matter, and I will admit, when I first heard that, I didn't totally understand really what all it meant until I looked deeper into it and realized that what the mayor said is true. Black lives do indeed matter. I think the tendency is sometimes to say all lives matter. But I now understand that, like the mayor said, if Black lives don't matter, then really no lives matter at all. So totally behind that and understand it and feel for that movement and understanding that all of the injustices that occurred have to be addressed in order for us to move forward as a city, a state, and a country.
When I think about the term, what created the need for that term, I think about that over the years, 400 plus years in America and the diaspora, that those of African descent lives have not mattered, that we have been treated as property, and that with the report over the years, such as the Kerner Commission, things have not changed in terms of the value of those of African descent lives in America. So when I hear the term Black Lives Matter, it just reinforces what has happened in this country over the years, that we have not mattered and we've been treated less than human in some instances.
Mr. Mayor, during this program, we've had about 40 minutes of a robust conversation. So let's get to what's next. How do you want to be held accountable on this issue, on this critical issue? Give me your personal checklist that you want me to go back and in 6 months or a year say, yes, Mr. Mayor, you have accomplished these things in light of the conversation we are having right now.
Well, most immediately, the chief and I together, along with IMPD generally, do need to make substantial change in terms of public safety. That would be the most obvious and immediate first step that needs to be taken. And I'm pleased to report that steps are being taken in that regard. We are in the process of reviewing and changing our use of force policy. We are in the process of creating a civilian use of force review board with civilian participation. We have changed the civilian police merit board in substantial ways. So there is fundamental change, not only in the training that our officers receive, whether it be implicit bias training or whether it be other forms of training that allow community and police to interact in positive and helpful ways, not confrontational ways. But to answer your question, and I don't mean to filibuster here, it really involves so much more than what we are immediately focused on in the area of public safety. It means educational opportunity and attainment and achievement for every student in Marion County. It means economic opportunity and economic hope for the people of our city who are so desperately looking for meaningful ways of recovering from, frankly, the last recession 10 years ago. It means opportunity for our kids in ways that they have been systemically denied over the years. That's why the efforts that were made in Project Indy and Indy Achieves are so very important to future generations. So whether it's health outcomes, whether it's food access, whether it's jobs, whether it's educational attainment and achievement, or whether it's police community relations, all of those things are now on the table. And I know that it's easier said than done to get all those things done in a couple of year period of time. But we're going to do our very best at making substantial change and eliminating systemic racism from the city of Indianapolis.
Chief Taylor, the issue of public safety, we've seen some tension between the public and protesters and police over the last few weeks. How do you restore the trust and confidence in your workforce, which I may add, really the majority of people come to work every day and do their jobs well, but we've seen this tension, right, over the past few weeks. How do you improve that on the issue of race relations?
Well, the first thing we do is we go back, we review the tactics that we took. I know I heard a lot of comments from the public that didn't want us to use tear gas or pepper ball and those kind of things. So I spoke with some of those groups, and I think one of the things we'll do moving forward is to make sure that we give clear and verbal warnings before any of those things are dispersed, but really to question, really, is that the best tactic? Is that really what we have to do in order to protect life or property? So we'll continue to review those things, and I, of course, will continue to listen to the community's concerns. We may also have to look at and see if there are other options, other things that might be utilized that would help out. Obviously, our concern is for the safety of the community and those lives, and of course the lives of our officers, but also property, in this case, that was downtown and those kind of things. So, we're fortunate to see that there were large groups of people that came down and protested, and there were no issues, and that's obviously fantastic. We would hope that that if we're going to go down that road again, that we can experience some of that, because then we don't have to deploy those things.
Chief, the mayor has made a commitment to body cameras for all police officers beginning by the end of the summer. Will that happen?
Yes, sir.
The mayor also talked about the use of force review board. When will we see that group put together? When will we see first the policy and then the group?
Sure. Well, the policy is under review. There have been some recommended changes to that, so we hope to get that out within the next few weeks. But it will. The one thing we do know is that we'll have some civilian participation. Whether that's the majority of the makeup of the group or not remains to be seen. But we know that there will be civilian participation in that. And that's something that hasn't happened in the past. So really, I'm excited to see how that works out. And hopefully people understand we're not opposed to those things. We understand that we work for the public, and we'll do our best to try to get a policy together that takes both sides into account and makes it beneficial to everyone.
Dr. Keglar, in recent days, words like enough, tired, I can't breathe have taken on a rallying cry demanding racial justice. For those that are using those terms, in this moment in time, are those the words to push this agenda forward?
Yes, I think they are, because any barriers that we have that leads to helplessness and hopelessness is what that means. And that's what causes the frustration and the terms enough is enough. Any barriers that leads to hopelessness, and helplessness.
Mr. Mayor, every city in the country faces a limited budget, and you've heard already calls on the issue of public safety across the country, a push to rebuild police departments, to redirect funds to social services. How will you answer that call here in Indianapolis? As some people say, why don't we take some dollars from different departments, Metro Police, for example, and redirect them to social workers and other folks that could maybe assist and support the police department in some critical needs?
Well, we have over the last 4 years made an unprecedented commitment to more law enforcement officials, to better equipment, to more safe equipment for our officers. Body cams just happen to be one. And I don't see our administration moving away from better safety, better equipment, better technology, so that you can have a safer so that you can have a safer community.
Chief, when you hear people in the public suggest that dollars should be redirected from you to other programs that some say are necessary, what's your reaction to that, sir? On this issue, as we take a look at this issue of racial disparities and this tension between the public and police.
Sure. So I guess I'm probably like a number of chiefs. I have concerns if you're talking about changing the budget to law enforcement. However, I will acknowledge that there are different programs that could use additional funding. I guess my concern would be if it's going to come out of the police department budget, where is that going to affect the police department? And we're just getting into body cams, those kind of things. You're going to take money that's going to reduce the number of officers being able to have body cams, or are you talking about reducing the number of officers on the street because we're going to take it from Character 1, which deals with salaries and those kind of things? That's where my concern would be. I'm not for that, but like I said, I'm certainly not opposed to rethinking some of the things, like let's say mental health. If you're going to tell me that we need to take money out of the police budget in order to deal with mental health, and you were able to show me that X number of dollars on the police budget is used for that, and we're no longer going to have to deal with that aspect of society, then maybe I would be willing to look at that.
Here's a question for all, and Chief, we'll begin with you. Chief, you are a father of 3. You've lived in Indianapolis for decades. This is a community that you love. So what have you learned in the past several weeks in light of this discussion that you did not know? That's part 1. And then 2, then what will progress look like for you in a year's time? Assuming that not all can be done right in a year's time, but what does progress look like for you based on what you've learned over the past few weeks?
Well, I guess what I've learned is that the community has strong concerns, valid concerns about their relationship with the police department. I guess I always kind of knew those things existed, but I didn't know maybe how poorly that relationship had been going. So you're right. I do have 3 kids that grew up here. We've had those conversations like so many parents have had when dealing with the police. But my conversations usually go something along the line like, if you're driving, please don't run from the police. Please be responsible and pull over, listen to what they have to say, and be respectful. And then if something were to still go wrong, then we know what avenues to take to make those complaints. Those have been my conversations with all my kids, especially once they started driving. As for the second part, what I hope to accomplish is, obviously, we have work to do with our police and community relationships. I've been willing to sit down at the table with a number of groups, and I'll continue to do that in order to, if we have to change policy or at least review policy, I'm certainly willing to do that, whatever it's going to take so that people of all races, but especially minorities, can drive down the street without fear of what's going to happen if they get pulled over or any contact they have with law enforcement. That's never been our goal, to scare the community. We want to have a great relationship with the community, and acknowledging that it's not there now, we're going to have to find those ways and do whatever it takes to change that narrative.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I think, Raphael, the thing that I've learned many things over these last difficult 5 weeks, but particularly throughout the entire year of 2020, dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think if there's one thing more than anything else that I have learned is the value of truly listening to others, to their stories, to their lived experiences, because there's not a moment in my life, there is not a single moment in my life that I will ever be able to say, honestly, I know what it is like to be a Black man in Indianapolis. And if that is true, and it is, then it is critically important that I listen to all individuals in our community, no matter the race, no matter the gender, no matter the ethnicity, to be a better mayor so that I can profoundly understand the unique set of circumstances and challenges that they face every single day. And if I do that, then the second part of that is you must not only listen, but you must act. And the time for action is not tomorrow, it's not next week, and it's not next year. It's today. It begins with all of us. It will require all of our community. And I think that Indianapolis, once it puts its mind to something, does have a good record of accomplishing big things. This may very well be the biggest thing that Indianapolis has ever faced, and we must embrace it thusly.
Dr. Keglar, before you answer my original question, you just heard from the mayor and the chief. How do we manage expectations? There's a lot of talk about making advancements, a lot of talk about making improvements, a lot of talk about reform, but expectations must be managed because this will not happen overnight.
I agree. But the expectations are important. And as a Black man who has 5 children, and I don't know many Black men who haven't had issues with the police, and we all say we all need the police. They're not all bad. And we all have times that we want to rely on them. I think the expectations, I have on 2 sides. On the governmental side, I think we have to taper our expectations from all levels of government. But I also have expectations for the citizens of Indianapolis. And that is to change the government, we need citizens who have a change of mindset and a change of heart. And that begins with the removal of racial scripting at an early age in the citizenry of this county, this city. That we have to come together and stop the racial scripting, because that is how it all begins. Passing the life script from one generation to the other, that is the core of racism. And we move it from families to institutions. And that's why we are where we are today. As Dr. Robert Williams, a noted psychologist, says, we have to look at it as we're all in this together. And if 2 elephants fight, the grass is the one that suffers. So we're all in this together.
And I do want to give you a chance really quick, Doc, to be able to answer the question that I asked the mayor and the chief, which is what have you learned over the past few weeks, and what does progress look like for you in a year's time? What do you want to see to say, yeah, that's it?
Well, I've seen progress from my government here that was encouraging to me during this crisis. I've also learned through the pandemic that we have some areas of disparities in health with the minority community that I would like to see removed. Our food deserts I would like to see addressed. But I am encouraged by the response that I've seen with our chief and our mayor. I'm very encouraged with that. And I talk to folks across the country, and I'm proud to say what we're doing in Indianapolis, I'm proud of that.
I want to thank our distinguished guests this evening, the Mayor of Indianapolis, Joe Hogsett, Chief Taylor, and Dr. Keglar. Thank you so much for joining this discussion. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of Tina Cosby and Karen Vaughn, Marc Mullins, Radio One, and WRTV, I'm Rafael Sanchez. Thank you for watching this program, and I hope that we'll keep talking with each other. Have a good evening.